Hello and welcome to another session on appreciating poetry. We have completed the first quatrain and the second quatrain, where the poet painstakingly tries to find out or find an appropriate metaphor which will immortalize the beauty of his beloved. But all the usual all the series, that's the series of cliches that he uses, which again is normally used in traditional love poetry. The poet finds that these cliches fail to adequately describe his beloved. So in attacking the basic metaphors and similes of love poetry, he hopes to show his readers what nature's changing course looks like. Nature's changing course will untrim every beauty of its ornaments. Right? As nature progresses, time, here obviously the reference is to time and its effect on every natural things, or every natural or every living things, and how the time affects every living things. It will definitely untrim every beauty of his ornaments. So the reason that these cliches fail is because the young man's beauty, the poet wants the young man's beauty to be eternal, compared to summer, which passes into autumn. The young man's summer should never end. That's what the poet wants. And in the second quatrain, where he speaks about every fair, everything that is fair will eventually decline. And every fair from fair sometimes declines. That is, everything that is fair today will have a decay in future. So that he does not want that to happen. He wants his young man to be fair, to be beautiful, to stay young and beautiful forever. And he wants the young man to own that fairness forever, that beauty forever. In the next quatrain, that is the third quatrain, he says that even death cannot claim the young man. He will, even though he wanders in the death's shade, in the shade of the death, even though the shadow of death moves around him, he says that death will never be able to brag about capturing the young man. There's a small reference to chapter 23 of Psalms in the Bible, the biblical reference to the valley of shadow of death, where the psalmist says, "I shall not fear, even when I walk through the valley of death, for the Lord is with me." 23-ാം സങ്കീർത്തനം. So the association of death with shade, again, I want you to bear that also in mind. See, look at the association of death with shade. Shade is darkness, shadow. So the death is associated with shade, or death is associated with shadow, which you will find that the metaphors introduced earlier in the lines 1 to 6, where beauty is associated with light. Okay, beauty is associated with light, beauty is associated with summer and day, with life as such. And death, on the other hand, is implicitly associated with darkness, with winter, with night, with death. The shade of death, shadow. So these lines are initially very puzzling, very confusing. And it's not clear why the young man is somehow exempt from death. We might be wondering, how is it possible that the poet can exempt the young man from death, because he is also a living organism. But the lines 12, the next lines, provide a very clear-cut clarification. The young man escapes from death because he lives, or in the speaker's words, grows in the poet's eternal lines. The young man is going to live. His body will decay, he will become old, he will die. But the young man is going to be captured. The young man is going to be immortalized by the speaker through his poem. His poetry, the poet's poem, shall immortalize the beauty of the beloved. Keats also have beautifully captured this in his poem Ode on a Grecian Urn. There is death everywhere, decay everywhere. Human life is not permanent. There's transience of human life. But art lives forever. Beauty lives forever. And it can be captured. Poetry is able to capture the beauty of anything and immortalize the beauty. So as the speaker turns away, you will find that the speaker slowly turns away from the traditional tropes of love poetry. And he discovers a new analogy. The young man's eternal beauty is like the eternal life of poetry itself. Poetry is forever. Now, some critics have seen this as an important break in the history of poetry. A moment where poetry begins to reflect on and talk about itself and its own powers. Indeed, as the speaker compares the young man and his own poem, his argument slips into circularity. The young man's beauty may be eternal, but it is only eternal because of the poem. All right? The young man's beauty may be eternal, it can be eternal, but how do you eternalize or immortalize this young man's beauty? You cannot compare it to any natural phenomenons. All the love poems, usual love poems, usual cliches used in the love poems, usual metaphors used in the love poems, which is not able to break the reality of life. All natural phenomena are subject to decay and destruction. So there he does not compare it, but instead he says he is going to immortalize the beauty of his beloved through what? Through his poems, through the poet's eternal lines. Okay? If the speaker does not consecrate his poem to his young man's beauty, the young man will definitely wander in death's shade. If he is not going to write about him, the young man will soon he is a living organism. Very soon he will become an old man. This young man will lose his youth, his vigor, his beauty, and he will be lost in the oblivion. But as long as the poet captures the young man in his poem, this poem is going to immortalize this young man as he is forever and ever and ever. And he will never grow old. He will never die. He will never wander in the death's shade. But if he does not consecrate the young man's beauty, or if he does not use the poem to capture the young man's beauty, then the young man will definitely wander in the death's shade. So the poem's action is circular, even recursive. It constructs the object that it praises. In this sense, one might wonder what the poem is actually praising here. Of course, the poem is about the beautiful young man, and it may actually be about it is about the beauty of this, how to immortalize the beauty of the young man. But it should be noted here that there's something else about it. What is exactly being praised here? Which power is being brought out here? That's why I said there are sparks of theory in this about poetry. The object here is definitely, of course, the young man, but it is moving in a circular motion because who is being praised here? What is the power? Whose power is being spoken of here? Is it the power of the young man's beauty that is spoken about here? And if so, how can this young man's beauty become so powerful? It can become powerful only through the poem. So which is more powerful? The poem is more powerful. And the poem needs an object to praise also. So that's why I said it's moving in a circular motion. And there are several critics who has opined or who had spoken about it. There's Joel Feynman. Joel Feynman finds that the poetry, or finds this as, let me quote him, the poetry of praise becomes a praise of poetry itself. The poetry of praise, that is the poem that is praising about the object, that is the young man's beloved, becomes the praise of poetry itself. It is also the praise of poetry as such, because the young man's beauty can be immortalized only with what? Only through the poem. So what is more powerful? More powerful is, or the poetry is indeed powerful. So in fact, even though it is a praise of the beloved, it is also a praise of poetry itself. So it's moving in a circular motion. The poetry obviously needs something to praise about, and this praise will become the object of praise will become immortalized only through a work of art here, which is poetry. All right, I hope you understood. So the third quatrain obviously the second quatrain, that is, sorry, the couplets will resolve the problem. So we have almost come to the end of the poem as such. Here the poet tells us that he has achieved the purpose. He has found out a way to immortalize the beauty of his beloved, and that is with the help of poetry. The power of poetry is brought out here. Okay, and now the final couplets. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. The final two lines of the poem. This is, I have told you that when I taught Sonnet 29, it's called the volta or the turn in Shakespearean sonnet. The turn of thought. The speaker summarizes the argument he has supplied in the previous 4 lines. And he does so in a bold, even presumptuous terms. As long as people continue to read his poems, as long as people live, okay, the young man will also continue to live. As long as there is humanity, as long as there is humankind, there is the human beings live on this planet, as long as his poem is read by them, this young man will also continue to live. Okay, and the speaker has almost this absurd faith in the power of his own poetry to endure, to continue, to interest the readers forever. So he's far-sighted. Shakespeare is far-sighted. He says that he has complete faith in his poetry, and he knows that his poems will be read for years to come, for generation after generation. Okay, so the poem ends with a note that as long as there is human beings, his poem shall continue to be read, shall continue to delight his readers, and thereby who will live forever? His beloved will live forever, and the beloved's beauty will always remain like this forever. He will always be young. He will never be subject to death or decay. Okay, so that's about it. Now we'll just quickly go through the symbols used in the poems. The symbols, you have the symbol of seasons. You have the sun as a symbol. So let's first look at seasons as a symbol. So the seasons are used here as a symbol of seasons. Seasons normally divide up the whole year. In Western culture, season unfolds like a story from birth to maturity, maturity to decay and death. So he, as I told you earlier, he's breaking away from the traditional metaphors and symbols used in love poems. Now the tradition here, or especially sonnet 18, is like there's a strained relationship with the tradition of love poems. Love poems normally use the season as a symbol for human life. Here, what Shakespeare does is he uses it, but only to refuse it, because the seasons normally imply a narrative change, normally imply a progressive, a linear motion, a transformation, an aging, a decay. But that doesn't serve his purpose. He wants his beloved to be eternal, to be immortalized. He wants his beloved to be away from death. He wants him to live forever, and therefore he breaks away from this usual tradition of using seasons as a symbol of life. So that is one instance that I want to tell you. Another one is the use of the sun, which I already spoke about in the video. The Renaissance love poetry, sun is often used as a symbol for physical or personal beauty, because sun is the source of all life, all light, and comparing one or someone or something to sun suggests that they are unusually, even exceptionally beautiful. Further, sun also sounds like sun, as I told you, which is there's a pun on that word, and it becomes a symbol of Christianity in reference to the fact that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So it's sonnet 18, the speaker considers comparing the young man to the sun, but again rejects that comparison, noting that sun's beauty is often dimmed by clouds. It hides behind the clouds. Now let us look into the poetic devices used in the poem. Let's first look at the themes used here. The very important themes that are used or that runs throughout the poem is that of love, is that of imperfections of nature or the impermanence of life, and the permanence of art and the exemplification of poetry as such. Then you have the rhetorical question. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It begins with a rhetorical question. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Implying that the poet very well knows that this metaphor this usual cliche is not going to be an appropriate means of comparing the beauty of his beloved. He knows that very well. So he uses this rhetorical question, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And then you have personification. I don't have to tell you what personification is. You have already learned that, so I'm not going to repeat. especially the first semester is over. All that is taken, rhetorical devices. You have also learned that in ways with words, as well as in introducing literature. So the personifications in the poem are the eye of heaven, and then his gold complexion dimmed. All these are personification, where sun is personified, the sun. Nor shall death brag. Now death is personified as a human, given human-like qualities, bragging, boasting. And this gives life to thee. That poetry gives life. Then you have apostrophe. The poem is apostrophic with the general use of thy, thee, thou. Now, they are all archaic words. Now, what do you mean by apostrophe? Those who studied, you have studied all this in your 10th standard and your 12th standard for your board exams. You have already studied these literary devices. What do you mean by apostrophe? Apostrophe is a literary device where when a speaker breaks off from addressing one party and instead addresses a third party. This third party may be an individual. Either he would be present in the scene, or he is absent in the scene. It could be an inanimate object. It could be an abstract concept. Inanimate object, like, something like a thing, non-living thing. It could be an abstract concept like death. Or here, if you look at it, he is using thy and thou and thee sometimes to of the beloved itself. Sometimes it is often it is a reference to the sun. Okay, like for instance, thy, thee, thou, etc. here, which could be sometimes, see, death, nor shall death brag thou. There it is addressing that abstract concept. Okay. And then you have metaphors. In fact, this is a classic example of metaphors. They are not. They are different from simile. Now, how are they different from simile? There is comparison happening. Now, what is a metaphor and a simile? What is the difference between a metaphor and a simile? A metaphor is one that explains or has compares one idea with another. That states one thing is another in order to help explain or give to bring out that similarities. Whereas simile is also the same thing, but it uses the word like or as. You shine like the sun. Whereas in a metaphor, they don't use the words like and as. He was like a lion in the battle is a simile. He was a lion in the battle is a metaphor. Okay, so here you have metaphors, a classic example of metaphors here. Darling buds of May is a metaphor. Gold complexion is a metaphor. The eternal summer is a metaphor. Eternal lines to time, the line 12 is a metaphor. All these are metaphors. Okay, there is a comparison, but without the use of like or as. Because if you use like or as, it becomes a simile. Then next is, thou art more lovely and more temperate, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. Now look at that sentence. Look at it and see if it is a fact or a truth. Thou art more lovely and more temperate than the sun. You are more lovelier than the sun, more temperate than the sun. So it is an exaggeration, right? That's called hyperbole. Okay? But thy eternal summer shall not fade. That means I am going to immortalize you. You will never fade. You will never decay. Your eternal summer, that is your youth, will remain forever. And you shall not decay. You shall not die. You will live forever. Your youth will be forever. Now, is that possible? No. It's an exaggeration. So it's a hyperbole. All right. Then you have synecdoche. I have already taught you what synecdoches are in ways with words. The line eyes can see. As long as eyes can see. So long as eyes can see. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see. So eyes can see is a synecdoche. Now what is a synecdoche? Synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a part is made to represent the whole. Right? A small part, eye. Kannum kannum nokkirunnu. Remember? Yeah, all that. And then you have irony. Now, what is irony here? This is situational irony here. Because when in eternal lines to time thou growest, that is, the lover is said to continuously grow with time even in death. Thou eternal lines to time thou growest. That means the lover is said to continuously grow with time. These eternal lines, I am going to immortalize you through the lines. Even in death, you will continue to live. Now, there is an irony, situational irony. Now, what is that situational irony? Death means end of life, no? So, it's a situational irony. Okay. Now, repetition. Now, what is repetition? Now, if you look at the word anaphora and repetition, I would like to bring anaphora and repetition together. Anaphora and repetition are similar, but they are a little different. However, they are similar. Anaphora is again a rhetorical device, which was used by the Greeks earlier, long back. And it consists of repeating a sequence of words at the beginning of neighboring clauses, and thereby giving them emphasis. Okay. Now, what is the difference between anaphora and repetition? If they are both the same, then what is the difference? Anaphora is a repetition of words at the beginning of a clause, whereas repetition can occur anywhere. And it is a general term which includes anaphora. Repetition is actually a general term which is inclusive of anaphora. Anaphora begins in the beginning of the clause. Okay. For example, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this and this gives life to thee. So long, repeated there. So it's in the beginning of the clause. Anaphora is in the beginning of the clause. Okay. Whereas repetition can happen several places. For example, summer is repeated, eternal, the word eternal is repeated, this is repeated, so long is repeated, fair is repeated, nor is repeated. Okay, and these all are repeated to create an emphasis. So that is repetition. This is alliteration. Alliteration, you have already studied what alliteration is. Alliteration means the repetition of consonants. For instance, every fair from fair, fair from fair, chance or nature's changing course, see, chance or nature's changing course. They are alliterations. These are examples for alliteration. And then shall and shade in lines 11. Then you have the last line. So long lives this and this gives life to thee. So long lives, and this gives life to thee. Okay. This, thee. See. So there is a repetition of the consonants. Cha. Repetition of consonants. Then you have assonance. Assonance means repetition of what? The vowels. More lovely and more temperate. So the vowel sound is repeated. More lovely and more temperate. Summer's lease hath all too short a date. Then his gold complexion dimmed. All these are assonance. The examples for assonance where there is a repetition of the vowel sound. Okay, these are things that you have already studied, you know, so I don't have to come into it. Archaic words. Now, archaic words, what are archaic words? Old terms, old words, old terms. Thee, thou, thy, oust, growest, wanderest, all these are archaic terms or archaic words. Now, there is enjambment. Now, what is enjambment? Look at the line 2. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. And then rough winds to shake the darling buds of May. Temperate, and then it continues. It actually continues. It's not complete. Thou art more lovely and more temperate, rough winds to shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaves too, all too short a date. Now these are examples for enjambment. I have already taught you enjambment in Ode to Autumn. Okay, and words where what is it? A roadside stand. There are examples for enjambment. And what is the tone of the poem? The tone of the poem is appreciation of beauty and its exaggeration. And the mood of the poem is romantic, as if it professes love and adoration for the poet's lover or beloved. The diction, if you look at the diction is simple, the diction is straightforward, and it is archaic. And it depicts the setting of the poem, which is the Elizabethan era. It is a dramatic monologue with the poet persona lines being addressed to his lover. So thank you and keep safe.